Greetings and welcome to Life After Corona, a conversation between the elephant and concerned citizens on the past, present, and possible futures after this pandemic. Today I'll be speaking to Muthoni the drama queen. Muthoni is an artist and a cultural alchemist based here in Nairobi, Kenya. Karibu Muthoni.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. I appreciate your time.
Before we get into it, I think it's important for me to ask how you're doing. I mean, how is your family? How is your family? How are you coping with this new normal? And also importantly, how is the craft? How is your craft in this season of Corona?
So I'm really fortunate. I'm coping fairly well. I have mostly up days. There are a few down days when I guess it's really hard to fully accept that industries like ours, the music industry and like the live music industry, has possibly undergone a transformation that we are unlikely to recover from. And so the anxiety of not being able to really sort of predict what the future for our business looks like, or what the future for my artistry looks like. Some days the anxiety of that is overwhelming, and also busy work, right? Because now everybody wants you to write something or sing something or do something. So there are days that are just full of busy work. But overall, I'm coping well. My family's well. We had to have a really honest and scientific discussion with my mother in the first weekend. She was, still thinking about how she was going to go for mass. And we had to really have the scientific discussion with her about, her age and how the virus spreads and what it means. And I just found that taking the time to have the discussion in an informative way, not alarmist, but really factual, I think it made a difference for her. And I think it made a difference for my aunties and my uncles and the people in her sphere of influence, who she was then able to break down what this corona means. I think the truth is, though, it's very difficult to be okay when the whole world is falling apart. I find myself often overwhelmed by the extent of human suffering when you just see the things that people are going through. There's a lot of really cool Kenyan citizens actively fundraising for families who can't make ends meet because, they can't go to work, or people whose businesses have been destroyed, farmers, restaurant people, hotels, just observing sort of the toll of what failed businesses looks like in real practical terms for families. So the extent of human suffering, the injustice that's also come out with this. So, police officers arresting people for wearing the wrong mask. And, it's not really about the wrong mask. I think Boniface Mwangi put out some 2 videos yesterday on his Twitter. And those are not the only cases. There's just been multiple cases of stories where, officers of the law just abuse the situation. So, and also, the cases of domestic abuse have significantly increased. I think about all the kids who are trapped at home with abusive parents or with abusive relatives, sexually or physically, and just unable to get out of that situation, for whom home is not safe. So I just think that the days when I really do get overwhelmed with the human suffering, and just knowing that there is no defined end date. Because, when Corona ends, it's not like a light switch where it'll just turn the world back on. It's going to probably be, we try something, then it doesn't work, then we go back into a version of quarantine, or then, just knowing that there's not an easy answer or an easy end date to this situation. I think there are times when that makes me feel really overwhelmed.
Interesting. I mean, you've told me how Muthoni is doing, but and you've already touched. The next question I had to ask you about, as an artist, what do you make of the Corona pandemic? You've already touched about big ideas on human suffering, what's happening on the ground. But but looking at the world from an artistic lens, and if you're to describe the moment or to speak into the moment, how would that look like for you?
Yeah, I would say that we're just seeing this vicious and cyclic nature of the world that we've created, right? So public health officials have been saying for a long time, we need to put more resources into WHO and to generally countries having a robust public health system. And just seeing, politics and other things like those taking precedent, and so professionals not getting what they need to do the work that they need to do, and then hospitals being understaffed and underfunded, and schools of medicine being understaffed and underfunded, and then the more human beings keep taking down forests or trying to put things in forests, development, I say it in caps, in forests. So this interaction, the blurring of sort of wildlife and human life, and just all these opportunities that we keep creating for problems to fester, for viruses to cross over and to mutate. And even now in the middle of a crisis, just to watch that the world continues to make financial decisions before they make human decisions in a country like America, that's astounding. It's also pretty sad and interesting to see how the West is floundering, to see, people like the UK, how they have such pride in their NHS, and just to watch them really realize that it turns out all politicians are the same, whether they are in a third world country or in England. They always choose themselves first. They always, they say the things that they think people want to hear, but they don't really do the things that are going to fundamentally make a difference for human life. And just seeing how much of this human suffering could have been alleviated, or can be alleviated and won't be alleviated because, money. Or in China, where Chinese people woke up in the morning and decided the Africans are the problem, in keeping with the racism that has existed. But in this moment, that the racism has absolutely no compassion. Not that you would query racism to have compassion for the people that it's
right.
But yeah, so I just, as an artist, just observing this thing, it's really, it's pretty sad. The other side is also, we've seen, at least I feel like we've seen, a lot of human effort. Scientists working, and doctors working, and nurses and healthcare workers and community organizers just coming together and raising the alarm and raising the money and mobilizing us to think about people who governments are going to ignore, and to fill in the gaps that, structures and systems should have filled. It's really good to see the human spirit sort of just rise in solidarity with one another, and people just really coming through for one another on a very humane level. I think it's pretty beautiful in the midst of this mess that there is still so much good in humanity. Yeah.
Interesting. I mean, I'd like now to just move this conversation forward. The arts, in this season of Corona have been at the center of this. To say the least. We have seen. Maybe 3 weeks ago now, there's this heated debate on social media around. The 100 million that has been given to artists to entertain people in this season. Outside of that, we have seen actually real artists. We have seen you, Nyashin Saptisol, and the rest actually doing some very soul-lifting work from the comforts of your homes.
Yeah.
But what I find interesting is that in all this, there's always been this tension between the artist world and the state. If you could just describe, why this tension is there.
Okay. So first, I appreciate you bringing up the issue of 100 million, and I think it's important that we say this because the artist community felt very, very happy with the president's announcements, even if we knew that it is not new money, because this is the first time we've been publicly acknowledged by the executive branch. This is the first time that there's a voice on the table that's saying, as you're thinking about business owners and industry owners and the economy, think about the artist community. Think about those people. And I think that that's definitely a step in the right direction. The result of that then within the artist community has been a lot of, organizing, mobilizing, lots of WhatsApp groups, exchanging of ideas, things that had started that, then stalled. We're seeing a renewed sort of vigor around that. Now we even have a report that's just been released today by the Hever Fund. It's called COVID-19 Effect on Creative Sector Response. And really, they're seeing, true action from the practitioners, figuring out their problems, mapping the problems, the size of the problems, and how to respond to the problem. And this 100 million that had been, promised, has been promised by the president, it already exists. It has to be acquired through agencies. Right? This money sits already in the sports ministry. It's a fund that has existed, and agencies such as the Permanent Presidential Music Commission, you can go to the fund and ask for the money. There's very specific guidelines about what the money can be used for, reporting. So I just think, whereas in many ways it was very political for the president to come and say, I've given artists 100 million, and it sounds like a good pronouncement. We also take the positive in that pronouncement, because in centering artists in the conversation, it made everybody stop and think, but there's this class of creators, and how do creators survive when things are really sideways? So that's the positive. I would say that the relationship between the state and artists has always, at best been precarious. I think that whereas, for example, the state has always said we love artists and we want to support artists. We've had a bill, for example, the intellectual property bill that's been sitting as a draft since 2013. That's 7 years ago. Finally, because of this pronouncement by the president, now there's like some sector work, and now people are sitting and they're giving their responses to the intellectual property bill. But the truth is, without an intellectual property bill, there's no way to harmonize the agencies that take care of artists' intellectual property. And artists' intellectual property is life. That's really their food for the rest of their life. That's your legacy, right? So Daudi Kabaka's children shouldn't have started from zero, because he has all this music that has been created and that has a life guarantee, and they should be able to earn from this for the rest of their life. But without the protection system, without the legal framework, without the players operating from the same playbook, nothing's going to happen. So whereas the state has always said we love artists and we love artistry, when we look at their what they say and what they do, there's always been this huge mismatch. When I think about like the film sector, the KFCB, Kenya Film Classification Board, has, at best been a stumbling block. I'm sure people could argue and say that there's been some pretty cool things that it's done, and I'm sure there must be some good things that it's done to help some artists. But overall, it has actually created and it has contributed to the idea of censorship and really limited the creative space as opposed to increasing the creative space. So I just find that what the state says and what the state does are two different things when it comes to artists, historically. But usually when there's campaigns, they remember us. They need people to sing songs. They need people to make artwork, to make jingles for their advertisements, and people to write out those advertisements. So when it's almost election time, when there's some propaganda that needs to be passed on, we remember that we require artists, and I mean it at all levels, whether you're talking about, a popular artist singing in English, Swahili, or their vernacular language, or, choirs, which are a huge propaganda mechanism.
Right.
So I think our relationship, quite honestly, is and continues to be precarious. I am cautiously optimistic that because the moment of COVID has presented itself, and because artists have rallied, and I think because of the other mitigating circumstances, I think guys just now know politicians are not your friends. Don't trust them. Make sure that they fulfill their promise within the time that they promised it. And I think maybe I'm also a little bit optimistic because 2022 is around the corner and they have to get elected again, which means that if we are to sort out anything that we need sort of from a legal from an infrastructure perspective, this would be the time as artists to really lean into this moment and say, come through, quid pro quo. If you come through now, we might come through for you in 2022. I know it's a little jaded to think of the world that way. Do for me and I do for you, but I don't know how else we can go about it with the political class in
political
Kenya.
Class. Which, I mean, that's a good end to that question, the political class. Because, I mean, as you've mentioned, this has been a very unfair relationship between the artist and the political class, which is still very part of the colonial state. I mean, in an interview about 2 months ago in Spice FM, you were talking about this colonial state and its relationship with the artist. Would you guys kindly give me a history of this relationship, where it came from, and why this relationship is the way it is?
Yeah. So I think for me, what I was trying to do in that conversation was to frame the way we think about now. And to me, I just feel like there's no way to think about now without going back to before Kenya was Kenya, right?
Right.
So from everything that I have read, before Kenya, the territory was called Kenya. The people who occupied this land since 6 million years, like prehistoric man. Kenya, in that Turkana area, literally invented the Homo sapien, the human species that we understand now as ourselves to being. So we've been here for a really, really long time. And when you read through our history, we've been great. We've been trading, we've been building boats to trade with people, across oceans, across lakes. We've been intermarrying, commerce had been happening. We had civilizations. The Kenyan people, the people who make this land, have been and continue to be great. And then, comes some white colonialist who says this line now determines you to be Kenya and you can't go outside of these boundaries and these are the new rules. And they impose a way of thinking on the people, and they don't ask for our consensus. In fact, we actively resist them because we are good with the way we were living and how we were, going about the business of being alive. And they come and they put all these restrictions upon us, and they say your name is no longer your name, and your God is no longer your God, and your history is no longer your history. And they do such a stellar job of erasing who we are. By the time, sort of Kenya acquires its independence, and now we become this, self-governing entity, so much of who we are has been confused or erased with now who we are meant to be, right? And for me, in framing it that way, I thought that was important because, when you go back into prehistoric time, what was the role of the artist? What was the function that had been assigned to the artist, right? So there was always an entertaining function, that's for sure. But it was also to mark things, to say something about that particular period that you are in, right? It's not just entertainment, it's, let's say, a wedding. Or it's not just entertainment, it is a coming into age ritual for, a group of people. So I think that the artist has always been very important to mark and to record the passage of human history, the passage of time, the experiences that human beings have. They've always been very instrumental to that. And one of the things that then the colonial state did, it said that we have to sanction, we have to censor what people say and how people say it, and we have this really horrible films and stage act that's been there, that came with the colonial constitution, the constitution that we got, right? I call it the colonial institution because it was written, before our independence, and it took us, several, years, decades to finally write another one, which was meant to reflect our image and our likeness, and in our image and our likeness, we said we want, at the heart of it, for people to be able to be free, to be forward thinking, to be imaginative, to be creative, the idea of a human being able to have their full existence. But at the same time, you have these clauses of censorship within this constitution. So again, that that we find ourselves in this precarious arrangement with with the state, it's not by mistake. I think it was designed that way. I think that it was designed to make sure that artists are not able to say what they want to say, how they want to say, when they want to say.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to create these rules. And I certainly agree that there is need for classification of information. I think that if you're going to watch pornography, you should walk in knowing that it is pornography.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And you should be able to make the decision whether you want to consume it or not, right? It's really the exercise of your agency.
Absolutely.
But what I don't think, for example, should happen is that you should censor the person who's making it, right? Because that is a valid expression. Now, it doesn't have to be what you want to consume, but you shouldn't stop somebody from creating it because it could be useful for somebody else. You know, I think, so we just find ourselves constantly.
It's a question of agency. I mean, I like that, a question of agency.
It's really a question of agency.
So I mean, what I'm hearing you say is that, I mean, the colonial state removed agency out of the Kenyan people, or the people who are there before the idea of Kenya. And since the space for artistry is to articulate, I mean, the human history, which is a question of agency, we actually come to a space where we are artists find themselves in a very interesting predicament where you don't know how far in your agency you're supposed to articulate yourself.
Yeah. How far is far?
How far is far?
How far is far?
I mean, that's a hard one. How far is far? But which brings to the next question then. In light of this context, this colonial context, where, I mean, our agency was removed from us and artistic expression, and we have come 6 years after political independence. And then, what should be the role of the artist today? Because it's a very, very debated question. Should they entertain? Should they be revolutionary? Should they be?
Should they educate?
They educate, precisely. And a lot of times in our mainstream media, I mean, there's always this debate for when a song is produced, a film, etc. There is this debate about that are not doing their roles. So then, within our context, which is very nuanced, what should be the role of an artist?
Yeah. So I'm really glad you brought this question, because we had a really robust discussion in the prep of this interview. And I want to just say to you what I said to you before. The artist role is to be an artist. An artist's first obligation is to themselves, to create the most authentic work that they can, given the tools that they have in that moment that they are in. That is the artist's first and primary obligation. What you really want is for artists to be able to create the most honest and most best version of whatever it is that they are creating. But society has this expectation, and I see this all the time on Twitter. Yeah, you artists are not even talking enough. Where's your COVID song? Why aren't you guys doing a cool COVID song? And I'm just like, why is it your expectation that why is there a society's expectation that the artist owes them something? That we owe them consciousness, or that we owe them. And I guess it comes from the idea that, one of the things that an artist fundamentally does is to reflect society. Right. And so when society is looking for answers, or looking to understand something or internalize something, they look to artists to sort of, reflect the idea, the answer back to them. And I find this, whereas I think that the thinking has merit, I think it also is quite a lazy approach. You take the agency from yourself to think for yourself and to articulate for yourself your own thoughts, and demanding that an artist should articulate thoughts on your behalf. I think that's fairly lazy and highly entitled, because artists are just part of society. So if you don't know the answer, the artist doesn't know the answer either. At any rate, it's not like if the artist tells you the answer, you're going to do anything. Didn't Kaka sing for us Wajinga Sisi? And aren't we still doing Ujinga? Before Kaka, didn't Eric Wainaina sing Inchi ya Kitu Kidogo? In between that period somewhere, did I not sing Kenyan Message? So it's not that artists haven't been passing on important, social messaging over the years. Society just behaves how society behaves. They take what they think they can take, and then they leave the rest. And if they're not interested in behavioral change, if what they really just want is to have a moment of collective and shared outrage, then they have the moment of collective and shared outrage, and then they keep it moving, which is what Kenyans, typically do. Now, I do think what exists is an opportunity for artists to articulate their own thoughts and to articulate, I would say, the highest hopes and the lowest fears of the society, right? And to do it in a way that is highly unique, highly infectious, highly dope, right? So Fela, it comes to mind, right? A person who had extreme agency and like thought about himself as an African and really thought about the state of being, and at one time even declared independence for his house, from the rest of Nigeria, like a true exercise of agency and of ideas. And I think what we really should say, quite honestly, I think the thing that society should query artists is to be their whole authentic self, right? So don't trade your influence, for example, for money. Speak your whole truth. If you're going to make this song about politician X, sing it because that is your true and heartfelt conviction. And because singing or making a play or writing a piece of poetry, that is your true and best way to articulate the way you really feel. Don't do it because person X is paying more than, politician X is paying more than politician Y, right? When you sell your agency, I think that's a thing that society, for example, can reasonably demand of artists. Don't sell your agency. Don't sell your voice. Don't sell your authenticity. Because, artistry is around us and it's very subliminal. We get it from all corners. We don't even need to be thinking about it. And what we take from the art, is no two people look at a piece of art and think and have the same conclusion, right? So to be more thoughtful and to be more aware of what you put into the music and to make sure that, or into the piece of work, just to make sure that it is your highest, most authentic work. I think that's what a society can demand of artists. I think that's a fair demand.
No, that's a very fair demand. So then, I mean, I mean, I like that fair demand. It's a very good fair demand. But then
Thank you.
my question would be also then, I think, I mean, coming from someone who's not an artist, also this pushback that society demands of artists not to speak for power. Because many times, I mean, when we talked about this earlier, there are many times that sometimes artists may seem that they're speaking for their truest selves, but actually they're articulating the values and ideals of power. I mean, as you talked about earlier, the campaigns, etc. So is one, I mean, we're not one to say it's a good or bad thing, but then how does also then the artist maintain their soul in a space that power is very, very subversive, very violent, and I mean, artists need to eat, isn't it? Artists need to eat. They need to provide for their families. But in many cases, is that how they'll do it is that they have to speak the values and ideals of power and not reflect society. So how do you navigate that this kind of
stuff? It's complicated. I think about someone like Franco, who was, in Mobutu's Zaire. Franco had to sing a praise song for Mobutu because Franco was way too popular and way too loved by people. He posed a threat to, to the ego of the dictator, who happened to be a fan, but it's just like that kind of love and adoration that the artist gets, that should be reserved for me.
Right.
So the artist, to preserve their neck, is like, bro, I'm going to put you in a song. Don't worry. I got you. Right. I think about Tanzania, for example, now, where the president, Magufuli, has just been so repressive, you know. And one of Diamond's biggest hits from last year, you know, had lines, you know, praising and, you know, Magufuli Babalao, you know. It's just like you need to be on the right side of dictators because you're really trying to stay alive to, I don't know, fulfill your life's destiny. So I do think that it's not always black and white the way we assume it. And I think also history is littered with examples of when artists don't go in the direction that the state wants to go, right? So Miriam Makeba exiled, Huma Sekela exiled for some years. I would say that you had some Kamaro songs, you know, that for years were banned. People like Wahome Wamutahi, right? The columnist, the famous columnist, you know, just receiving police, the playwright receiving harassment for the works that they wrote. So I would say, as an artist, when you look at the state, you recognize that the state always has a monopoly of violence, and they can and have and will use it in the way that suits them. And so you find that a lot of artists generally just don't mess with the state. They're not for or against the motion. They tend to be fairly ambiguous about their political inclinations, right? Because then they've seen sort of what happens when you go against. And then you see the ones who go with the flow, right? So Diamond has a huge music empire in Tanzania now, with Wasafi Records, with the TV station, with the radio station, with the water. So you see that that's a strategic thing for Diamond to build a legacy that's going to be meaningful and helpful for many artists in Tanzania. He just needs to be cool with Magufuli so that he can ride out this era of Magufuli. So this thing is not black and white the way we often imagine it. But I will say, ultimately, an artist, like every other member of society, always has agency. It's always your voice to use. It's always your voice to use. You 100% must make bread, but you don't have to make bread from a dirty politician's money. You don't. You know. And if you decide on principle, I don't do politics. I remember in the last election, one of the main politicians who was running for one of the seats in Nairobi, and is somebody I've known for many years, wanted to use the song Naini Yahoo for his campaign. And I was like, no, bro, I don't mess with politicians. I don't believe in your vision, and I don't mess with politicians. So the answer is no. The election before, somebody else who was vying for the governorship of Nairobi had wanted us to do, you know, versions of Blankets and Wine, to take like the music and the culture to the people, and really to use music as political rallies. And we're just like, nah, again, we don't mess with politics. We don't believe in your vision, and we just don't mess with politics. So each artist has to apply.
Absolutely. So then my question would be, because I mean, as Corona showed us, and I think it's something that everyone has now learned, is that politics is everything. You know, I mean, the late President Moi would say, "Maisha mbaya sasa." So then how then, because I mean, artists can't be apolitical, regardless, even if they are speaking truth to power or just articulating their voice. Then where does that leave the artist?
I think it leaves the artist where they've always been, as necessary. I really think as the starting point, right? I really think that the main power of artistry is imagination. That's the thing. That's the bottom line.
I like
when
that.
you pick apart artistry, it just goes back to the ability to imagine, right? And you really want to encourage society to imagine. You really want to encourage people to actively exercise this thing called imagination. Imagine a world in which AIDS no longer exists. That's the hypothesis that doctors had to begin with, for them to then spend all these years and end up at, okay, so these are the different ways that we can deal with AIDS, and this is the cure, a potential cure for AIDS. Now let's test this on people, right? How can we imagine a world in which we have less accidents? Got it. So Tesla and Google and all the tech firms, then thinking about driverless cars, right? So intelligent cars. Can we imagine a world in which there are no wires? So earbuds, with the iPhone. Imagination is literally the basis of human progress. I think the combination of necessity and imagination, I really think you need them in equal measure. Right? And so I just think that, and this is the thing I truly and fundamentally believe with my life, is artistry is innate in everybody. It's not unique and belonging to, I don't know, 2 million people in the whole population of humanity are artists. That's not true. Artistry as a way of existing, of being, it's a way of thinking. That's literally what it is. It's a way of being able to imagine, and it's a way of inventing. It's a way of imitating, then inventing on top of the thing that you are imitating. And you want to make artistry, you want to center the arts in the evolution of a young mind. You want to center the arts in the evolution of a teen mind. You want to center the arts in business process. You want people to actively think about imagining. And that's also how we're going to get out of this goddamn mess that is our country. We've just got to imagine a place, imagine a country that upholds human dignity. So what are all the interfaces of human dignity? So a healthcare system that prioritizes human dignity, and an education system that prioritizes human dignity, a policing system that you want people to have this conversation of imagination, and then you want to say, now let's build this utopian world. And in fact, to me, that's what leadership is. Leadership is the ability to imagine a different outcome from sort of where you are. In fact, to imagine the outcome that you're then telling everybody, let's walk towards this thing, right? I imagine that's probably what happened with Moses, where he's just like, yo, we have to bust out of this place called Egypt. I don't know what's going to happen, but definitely nothing better than slavery is happening here. So can we imagine another world where we are not slaves? And what does that look like, right? That's definitely what fueled or sustained the fight for independence in Kenya all these years. You want your land back, and you imagine prosperity that comes with being in charge of your own destiny. So you have to throw out these colonialists. To me, it's the center of everything. It's the heart of, it's the base, it's base level. And I find it really frustrating when we make it sound like art is only for a special group of people, or only some gifted people can interact with it, or it's too hoity-toity, or it's not a basic need. It's basic to the human existence to be able to imagine better futures. That is what moves a society forward. Of course, plus necessity.
Necessity. I like this idea of imagination. And my last question, to you as we wind up, is in a world post-corona, how, in your thinking about possibilities, how one should be the artistic space here in Kenya, in Africa, what are some of the things that you would still like to be done? But then too, how can we now have a conversation around the idea of the artist imagination and the human being at the center of our existence?
Okay. So I'm hoping that one of the main things that Corona is going to do is to show the world that this world we've designed doesn't work. A lot of us already know that the world doesn't work. But I'm hoping that now, Babylon has to fall at a minimum, because I think that then Babylon's got to fall. All versions of Babylon have got to fall. I think just here in Kenya, we've now realized, so kumbe we can have weeks on end without politics. How refreshing. How refreshing. So it means that politicians are not so primary the way they like to make themselves out. Okay, So maybe it's a revolution of the mind, right? A coming into awareness that Kenyans are going to experience right now, that the things that actually matter is your family, their health, your living conditions, the dignity of your work. And so make this the development priorities. No more stop building for us, I don't know, roads and flyovers and etc. and trains. I think we want to just do the things that like dignify the human being. For me, I find that going forward for my sector, I really think it's going to be important to dignify the artist. And what I mean by that is make it possible to acquire and retain the skills for artistry. So start teaching music in school again as a compulsory subject. Teach art as a compulsory subject. And then develop artistic learning in schools, in universities, in tertiary education. Make it possible to acquire and refine skills. Protect the work of the artist. A legal framework has to exist so that the work of the artist is able to fulfill its true commercial potential over its lifetime, right? You want to pay the artist, and you want to create a system of unionizing artists and artistries. You really want to create a minimum standard for artists and artistry. So in my particular sector, which is music, all instrumentalists, for example, should unionize. This has been my feeling for a long time, because that's how you standardize. When you call a guitarist to come and play for you the theme song for your podcast, there's a standard minimum fee that you understand is paid to this artist, right? I think it's also going to be really important to center artists in these think tanks, right? Whether like your economic recovery think tank, whatever, that thing has got to have a couple of thinkers. And artists are fundamentally thinkers.
Absolutely.
We want to have a bunch of people there who say, what if, right? And really to be willing to go down the rabbit hole of what if. Now, to build a robust ecosystem for the artists, you have to build the skill set. I just feel like we don't have a creative industry until we have professionals. So not everybody is an actor or a writer. We need hundreds of thousands of business managers, PR practitioners, event producers, stylists, designers, set designers, makeup artists, people who literally invent colors, you know, like new shades of blue or new shades of red. You want to think about the intersection of tech and art, and you really want to build out a generation of truly skilled people who can work anywhere in the creative sector, right? And I think you really want to center creative output. We should design, let me say that again. What I would like to see is the creative sector understood as a true manufacturing industry, right? And it is a true manufacturing industry because there is output. And this output is for local and export. And it has a true commercial cost to create it and a true commercial cost when it goes to market, a commercial value when it goes to market. So it can earn money, and it can earn money over a long period of time. So instead of thinking about this thing as, manzeni poa wasanii wako na talent to support my youth, stop supporting, right? And become very strategic in the way you think about this, because creative work is self-propelling. I spent the morning writing for another artist. It's self-propelling. I don't need anything, just the vibes with that artist to be able to write. And even sometimes I don't need vibes. I just need a topic and I'm going to write, correct? So when you start to think about the people in the creative industry as players in a manufacturing industry,
right?
So you ask, what is another manufacturing industry in Kenya? Let's say textiles or banking, right? Even banking is not a manufacturing industry. You really want to think about a manufacturing one, like extraction of textiles, extraction of cement. Yeah, you really want to think about that. And you want to ask, what are the things that you do there that you should then do for the artist? So what is the legal framework? What is a way for them to access capital? What is a way for them to upskill? What is a way for them to get to market? What is the value chain of this manufacturing industry? How do we increase professionals? How do we increase access to capital? How do we very immediately close a gender gap if there is a gender gap? How do we make space for this thing to cross-network with its own components? And how do we really utilize this and say, this is the flyer for Kenya, right? And it's not without precedent. Nigeria have successfully done that with the film industry. South Korea did that with K-pop. And of course, the biggest of them all, America. The whole American narrative of the land of the brave and the home of the free, land of the brave, greatest country in the world, that's all been made by the movies. That's all been invented by the movies. The idea of what a beautiful woman looks like, that's all images, photography, magazines. That's literally the power of storytelling. So you really have to tell a new story about Kenya. And so you have to go to the storytellers. And then you have to make imaginative storytelling a part and parcel of the way we learn. So for all our primary and tertiary education, we must be put in situations to think differently because we learn the arts. And by learning the arts, we just like create new pathways in our brains. And, then let's make a new Kenya.
Let's make a new Kenya. Muthoni, that's a perfect end to this conversation. And let's go. We need the storytellers to make a new Kenya. Thank you for being on this Life After Corona conversation.
I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right.
Pass my regards to the family. Okay, bye.